Welcome to Tiny Teaching Topics with Robin Lacrosse, essential conversations to have with your kids about sex. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about the HPV vaccine. I know this can be very controversial, so we're going to explore some of the different angles and aspects of the vaccine. So let's get started. Welcome to Tiny Teaching Topics with Robin Lacrosse, essential conversations to have with your kids about sex. In today's episode, we're going to be talking all about the HPV vaccine because if you have children, sooner or later, you're going to have to make a decision whether or not to vaccinate your children against a virus that could potentially cause cervical cancer and other types of cancer.
So let's talk about the HPV vaccine, because one of the things I want to do is have this webinar to be a good resource for mom, and also I have kind of an interesting idea with this whole new HPV testing thing. And I'll just throw it out here. Let's say, for example, you and your partner did this HPV genotype testing. Let's just say, for example, you don't have any HPV, and your partner comes back with positive for HPV 16, which is the one that puts you at greatest risk for cervical cancer. So what if you were to take these test results and go to your doctor and say, look, my partner, he is my soulmate, he is my forever guy, we're going all the way, we're making babies together, everything, like pick a fence, the cat, the dog, the whole 9 yards. And so what if, because he's positive for something that could potentially put me at risk at cervical cancer, which I definitely would rather avoid, and because we plan on having kids someday, there is going to be that exposure at some point. Could I, since I am negative for HPV and I had this DNA genotyping test done, receive the vaccine to protect myself? In my personal opinion, that is like such a reasonable request, like, oh my God. And what if we were able to really be able to judiciously, apply the vaccine in certain situations? I know that they just want to, blanket vaccinate everybody, and I know that teenagers, they get crazy with their hormones, their frontal lobe, their brains are not fully developed, and they're making impulsive decisions that are not really thought all the way through the consequences kinds of things. So, yeah, there's a lot of things to take into consideration. But I just love exploring the possibilities and the idea of being able to apply the tools that we have available to us in ways that make sense. People are worried about vaccine. HPV vaccine is super controversial. People are worried about that. Do I want to expose my kids to something terrible that could happen? So let's talk about HPV vaccine. I don't really have an opinion one way or the other about the vaccine. I feel like it's a tool. And with a lot of tools that are out there, there are certain risks involved. If you use a skill saw, if it kicks, you could lose a finger if you have your finger in the wrong place. Or, there's risks with it. If you drive your car, if you get in a car crash. And you have to kind of weigh the risk and see what's right for you, for your family, for your children, okay? Only you can make that decision. So let's talk about the reasons for vaccinating, okay? We do know that vaccines have been a huge boon to the world in general. We've pretty much eliminated polio, smallpox, these measles. A lot of these diseases are pretty much non-existent except for small pockets here and there where, they used to, be devastating to populations of people. So reasons for vaccinating. There are millions of new diagnosed cases of HPV every single year. It is our most common sexually transmitted disease, and as we talked about, it's not being tested for in the general population. The self-collect companies, they are the only ones who are offering this right now. So we talked already about that it's hard to detect. You can't test for it except for what we just talked about. Increases the risk of different kinds of cancer. It's an invasive. The treatments are invasive, in my opinion, my personal opinion. They're barbaric and kind of inhumane. So if we can do something natural first, I'm all for that. Again, my other webinar goes into that. Here's something else that's important to know. Organic exposure, so that means just like you being exposed in the course of your, sexual life or whatever. If you come down with HPV and are diagnosed with it, it does not give you immunity to that strain of the virus in the future or from other strains of viruses in the future either. So it's like you get the infection, you don't develop immunity for it. With the vaccine, that's how you get immunity because they do it differently. They jack it up, the whole thing. I mean, I'm sure they still talk about it in school, how the whole virus system, vaccine system kind of works and that kind of thing. So I don't want to go into that today. But in general, the vaccine appears to be safe and well tolerated based on 170 million, issued vaccines over, I'm sure by now, to date. And we talked about this before. Condoms don't provide 100% protection, and neither does the vaccine. Okay? The vaccine protects against the number of the number of strains of the virus that are included in the vaccine, so that's either 4 or 9, and we'll talk more about that here in just a second. So reasons for against vaccinating. Condoms greatly reduce your risk. Female condoms provide even better protection because it covers some of the outside area. They're more expensive, but if you're creative, you can find ways to get them. Sometimes they give them away, like at different events or, different things. Sometimes Planned Parenthood has them for free, different stuff. HPV infections often clear on their own in 1 to 2 years. And those that do progress are easily treated if you're getting regular annual pap smears, and they rarely progress to cancer. There might be one exception. Sometimes the more aggressive strains, 16 or 18, can progress in as little as 18 months. But, as long as you're getting your annual pap smears and keeping an eye on things, again, that's where the genotyping can be really helpful. Like if you've got one of these really aggressive strains, maybe you want to get a pap smear every 6 months if you're, taking steps to resolve it, on your own naturally at home. And my other webinar has lots of information about that. But so also HPV vaccine is relatively new. Some of the other vaccines have been around for 50 years, longer, that type of thing. This has only been around for, I think, close to 20 years. I didn't actually look, but something like that. And right now they're estimating immunity could last 20 years, maybe longer, and actually that's a positive thing. So I should actually move that over to the other slide. I knew there was something there I wanted to move. And there can be negative side effects. There could be short-term effects or effects that persist over time, which can be really debilitating and sometimes life-ending. And we will talk about that here in just a moment. All right, so let's start with the facts. Right now, the vaccine is given to kids between the ages of 9 and 12. There's 3 different kinds of vaccines. Gardasil 4 protects against 16, 18, 6, and 11. 6 and 11 are the 2 that are most likely to cause genital warts. Cervax vaccinates against only 16 and 18, and it's not available here in the U.S. anymore, but it is used extensively elsewhere in the world. And Gardasil, who has the American market for HPV sewed up with a nice little bow, has HPV 9 available, or Gardasil 9, available, which protects against 16, 18, 6, and 11, plus 31, 33, 45, 52, and 58. Each dose of the vaccine contains, I'm not going to read all the numbers, it includes aluminum, which is the adjuvant, so that is the vehicle in which the virus-like particles are delivered into the body. There is sodium chloride, sodium borate, and water, which makes up the saline solution. It's buffered, it's pH balanced. The L-histidine is there to stimulate the immune system, to stimulate the immune response. Polysorbate 80 is sometimes found in food or food products. It is an emulsifier, so it helps to prevent separation of the ingredients. And then there's little traces of yeast in there, yeast proteins, because they grow the virus-like particles on a Saccharomyces variety of yeast. And then the vaccine doesn't contain any preservatives or antibiotics. So that's what you're going to find in a vaccine. Now, let's talk about some of the more serious adverse effects from the HPV vaccine, okay? So are the stories about premature ovarian failure true? What about juvenile ALS or other long-term side effects? When I was doing research, the last time I put together this presentation, the big thing in the news was the premature ovarian failure, or POF, as it's often called. And actually, before we dive in here, I just want to say to you, I know vaccines are touchy topics and they're often banned in parenting groups because people feel really passionately on both sides of the debate about vaccines. So, I might say something that you don't agree with, and, that's okay. Check my information, do your own investigation. I am not an expert on vaccines. And honestly, I really don't want to be. I'm just presenting the information as accurately as I can, and you get to do your own research and decide, okay? So here's what I found, okay? The last time I sat down to do research for this presentation, the big thing in the news was premature ovarian failure. So I wanted to know, is this true? What's the deal going on with this stuff? Because the first time I looked into this, which was back in 2009, the big thing in the news was the ALS, the juvenile ALS, which I'll talk about here in just a moment. So I started just kind of like looking into the numbers and, why, anytime like somebody says, the vaccine caused premature ovarian failure or is responsible for the juvenile ALS or any of these things, it's like, how true is this, and, is this, who's behind this information, and, what is the real scoop here? And so I just try to break it down and go at it in a methodical kind of way. And so when I was looking to see, what are the actual rates of, premature ovarian failure, and what we know, what the scientific community's figured out is that 1 in 100 women under the age of 40 experience premature ovarian failure. And in most cases, women, the doctors are not able to figure out why it's happening. We also know that premature ovarian failure can occur in teenage girls, but it is rare. Now, POF is different from amenorrhea, which means that you're not getting your period for whatever reason, like athletes that are very lean, for example, will go, get amenorrhea, for example, like the gymnast, type thing. So it's different because it has characteristics of menopause, which means that they are testing the blood and they're finding that the follicle-stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone are elevated. Now, if you've attended some of my webinars on like the fertility aspect or natural birth control or any of those topics, then you've heard me talk about FSH and LH, follicle-stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone and the roles that those play in the body, which we're not going to go into here today. But basically, those two hormones are what makes ovulation happen. You know, there's a whole sequence of events, but if it's not starting off, you know, with the proper levels of those hormones, then, yeah, it's not going to happen normally. So in menopause, FSH and LH both rise, and it prevents ovulation from happening. And in the literature, there are 6 cases of premature ovarian failure that have been cited in association with the HPV vaccine, meaning that the kids got the vaccine and then they stopped menstruating, and then when they went and tried to figure out why, they had the elevated hormones and this kind of thing. So, did the vaccine cause it? Well, unofficially, probably. But officially, they'll never say that. And we'll talk about why here in just a minute, okay? So, 6 cases. Let me see, I'm just looking at my notes here because I know there's something else I wanted to say about that. The one thing that we, don't know is if these girls were at risk for this happening already. We don't know, in the literature, they don't really go into, the history, what these girls' health was like, any of the backstory, which could have important information that we need to know in order to determine, is the vaccine a responsible kind of thing. And so that's one of the issues with the vaccine reporting database, which I'll talk about here in a minute, and also with these case studies too. So there's been over 170 million boys and girls vaccinated, and only 6 cases of POF associated with the vaccine. So, it doesn't really seem like a lot when you consider that 1 in 100 women under the age of 40 are diagnosed with this problem, and we know that there is just a very rare segment of that under 40 crowd who are actually teenagers, a very small portion. So, again, the numbers don't really show cause for alarm for the general public. All right, so what about the HPV vaccine and aggressive juvenile ALS? So when I did the research originally, it's hard to say for certain when only 1 in 2 million children are affected by this particular disease. And ALS is just nasty. It's horrible. And it's fatal. People they can live for a while, but generally it means the end of you. Okay, so out of the 170 million children that have been vaccinated for HPV, that means if you just do the numbers, that up to 85 individuals could be diagnosed with juvenile ALS from, a population sample this size. So 3 isn't very many. And when I updated my information, I just kind of looked briefly through the vaccination adverse reporting database. I don't remember exactly what the title of it is. I might have it here in the slides. But, when I searched through that more recently, there was a total of 8 cases being reported. But only the aggressive cases, the 3 that I mentioned, really seem to be discussed in the scientific literature. So whether it's 3 or 8 out of 170 million kids, it potentially could be 85. So again, while it's absolutely, completely devastating for a family who got, gave their children the HPV vaccine and had this develop, devastating. And can they blame the vaccine? Absolutely, they can. Is it true that caused it? Honestly, we can't tell. But, you know, and this is why, this is like the issue. This is why vaccines are never going to be blamed for any of these long-term health problems, because they're always going to say, well, maybe this person was predisposed or there was something going on. So it can be really frustrating for parents who have had a child that has been adversely affected. The legislation protects, you know, the vaccine companies, all this kind of stuff. So it's a really uphill battle. You know, they have the numbers on their side. You know, they do the clinical trials, you know, and, you know, if they're in control of it, they can fudge the data. We'll never know until, like, somebody investigates and, like, this whole scandal breaks out. It's like, we'll never know. So we just have to trust that they're being honest, and that the FDA will protect us. And, yeah. Good luck there, too. Anyway, so don't want to get sidetracked. As I mentioned before, the shortcoming of these case reports, you know, like, there's no control subjects, there's often no backstory, there's data that's missing, you know, and when you're pulling information out of the raw data, out of the information, all that stuff is for sure missing. So let's talk about the chronic, quote-unquote, syndrome that happens post-vaccine. And we've been hearing a lot about this for, you know, a while. And this actually, when you think about, like, you know, like the measles vaccines, measles, mumps, and rubella, remember all the vaccines that the militaries got when they went over to the Gulf War? Remember that all the stuff in the news about the Gulf War syndrome? There's something going on here with these vaccines, okay? And what the researchers think is happening is that it's not necessarily like what I wanted to say was vaccine, but I can't use that word, and I'm struggling to, like, find, like, breaking it down further. But it's not necessarily, like, the viral particles of the vaccine that are causing the problem. It's the adjuvant. So it's like the aluminum or the mercury or the silicone. You know, it's like these things that they attach whatever they want the immune system to respond to build immunity. So it's the things that is attached to, the adjuvant, that gets put into the body, and some researchers are thinking that this is what is actually causing the problem, which I wouldn't doubt. And so here's a thought, too. You know, if you have a child who reacted poorly to vaccines when they were little, maybe you might want to think twice about, you know, the HPV vaccine. Again, you have to weigh the risks. Like, you know, is being protected against 4 or 9 strains of HPV that could potentially cause cervical cancer outweigh the risk of, you know, you might be the 3 in 170 million people. So you have to weigh that. Now, the Gardasil 9 vaccine is interesting because it's protecting against a lot more strains. So, yeah, you know, there's trade-offs. You got to think about that. Now, here's something else, okay, that I stumbled across just a couple days ago, which got me excited about. You know, DNA testing is a new forefront that we are currently exploring, and we're learning more and more every single day. And I think there's a huge potential here. Like, we're going to start figuring out some really cool shit in the, like, next 5, 10, 15 years, 20 years. And something I came across, it was just like a tiny little blurb, and it definitely piqued my curiosity. You may have heard of or seen advertisements for the company called 23andMe. It's a DNA testing company where you can send in and get a test kit, and they'll do like this genetic report on you. And so then you can take that raw data over to some of these other companies that are out there. The FDA made 23andMe separate this aspect from their business, so they can't offer this piece of it. But so there are other companies out there that are, and this one company called Prometheus. You upload your information into the database, and then you can like look around and start looking at things. And so I've had this done in the past, and so when I came across this little bit of information, okay, it kind of piqued my curiosity, and so I just kind of like started going and looking around. So this whole syndrome where people are reacting adversely to the vaccine, so the theory is that they're reacting adversely to the adjuvant. And what they are finding, and again, super new research, you know, they need to explore it further, but what they're finding is that there might be a higher prevalence in what they're calling the Asia syndrome, which is this collection of, extreme fatigue, neuropathic pain, tingling, dizziness, coldness, limb pain or weakness, memory issues, GI disturbances. What's interesting is like 50% of these people who are reacting adversely to the vaccines, like half of them will test positive on like a fibromyalgia test. I can't remember what the name of it is. I didn't write it down, and I couldn't find the webpage that I found that on after that. But apparently 50% will test positive for fibro. So are they, do they get the vaccine and develop fibromyalgia? I mean, there's a deeper issue going on here. It's like certain people don't react well to it. And so what they're finding is people who have this particular gene, HLA-DRB1, seem to have a higher risk of responding poorly to the vaccines. So if you happen to go and get DNA testing on yourself or your children or that kind of thing, you could go into Prometheus and look around and see if you have that gene. And the database, it took me a little while to kind of figure out, because like they have your test results and then like the different variations, and you kind of see like which variation you are, and then read that little snippet about what's up for you. And so yeah, it was kind of time consuming, but it was actually kind of fun. And I noticed too that a lot of people who seem to be reacting adversely to the vaccine are, I don't want to say have a higher risk, but there seems like there could maybe possibly be a correlation between like being at higher risk for diseases like, say, for example, MS, multiple sclerosis. So that's like, a neuron, your neurons break down. It's a neuropathic disease. So I'm wondering, and again, this is all brand new. These are theories. These are all my own thought processes, because I'm always like strategizing, like how can we use the things that are available to our advantage? How can we apply this in a way that's going to empower ourselves? And that's what this is about. I mean, that's what pretty much everything I do is about, is how to empower yourself. So if you'd like to talk more about like this whole genetic thing, I'm super curious to like play around with it more. And I'm hoping that some of my clients in the future will maybe, invest in DNA testing, because as I was poking through the information and stuff too, I found that there was a gene that, could increase your risk for cervical cancer, just a lot of interesting stuff in there, which, again, it's super new, it's all cutting edge, all the DNA stuff, all the genetic stuff, you got to take with a grain of salt, because there are other factors at play. That's just one little tiny piece, it's like your lifestyle, your, things that you're exposed to in your life, all the things that happen to your life all play a role. So if I can help you, please feel free to reach out. I'm here for you, and I appreciate you. I hope that you found this information valuable, and if there's anything I can do to support you, please let me know. Have a beautiful and wonderful day. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.